Hello everyone and welcome back. In this new lesson we are going to start the refactoring of our home component into reactive style, and we are going to discuss the benefits of that new approach. First, let's talk about some of the problems with the current version of the program. As we can see, we are manually here calling subscribe, and we are adding here some logic in the body of our success handler. So this is the callback that gets called whenever this HTTP observable successfully emits a value. Now, this type of code can easily degenerate in a more complicated example into callback hell. Let's have a look at the typical example of code that suffers from callback hell. So you might have encountered it before if you have maintained programs that don't use, for example, promises. This might be the typical type of logic that you have encountered before. So we are using here a function that has asynchronous behavior. So it doesn't immediately return a result. The result is going to get returned to us asynchronously by a callback function that we have to provide as the last argument of the function. So here is the input data of the function, and here is the callback that we want the function to call whenever the result is available. The callback usually follows this convention here. The first argument is the error, and the second argument is the output of the function. We start by checking for multiple types of errors, and if no error occurred, then we might do here a call to a second function that also needs a callback. So as we can see, after several callbacks and after adding several times this type of error handling logic, we end up with this type of very nested code that is hard to read and reason about. It's very easy to end up with multiple levels of indentation, and it's also hard to read, understand, and maintain this type of program. This type of callback hell is something that we want to avoid by using observables. But going back here to our program, if we start to manually subscribe to the multiple observables that we have available, we are going to very quickly end up with the same problem. So this is not the right way to use observables. Another potential problem with this component is that there is too much logic in this component. The component knows a lot about where the data comes from. The component knows that the data comes from the backend. The component also knows how to do the HTTP call and how to process the data that it receives. Ideally, the component shouldn't be aware of where the data is coming from, and also it should be easy to test this component in isolation without having to use a real HTTP backend. Also, we might want to do this call elsewhere on the program. Somewhere else on the program we might also need the same data. So this logic here, because it's embedded here inside the ng-oninit method of the home component, is not reusable elsewhere in our application. Also, our home component has these mutable beginner courses and advanced courses variables. Keeping data in these local mutable state variables is potentially problematic. If we make a change to this data here locally in the component, there is no way for the rest of the application to know that this data was modified. Modifying the data directly at the level of a component by mutating a member variable might introduce subtle dependencies with other components of the application, making our program harder to reason about. Also, if we would like to use an optimized change detection mode known as onPush, we would not be able to do so in a program where member variables are being mutated at the level of a component. This is because on onPush change detection, each component determines if the template should be re-rendered by looking at its inputs. If the data is being directly modified at the level of another component in the application, then there is no way for a component using onPush change detection to know that the data was modified. Ideally, what we would like to achieve here is a solution where the component does not know where the data comes from, it simply receives it when a new version of that data is available. the component should be able to display the data without necessarily keeping these local mutable variables that open the door for potential bugs. Also, the program should be written in a way where there is no nested code like the one that we have here. Ideally, our code should be flat, a bit like if we would write our program using promises. Let's see how refactoring this component into reactive style is going to allow us to solve all these problems.